how do I work with kids? We don't have the patience to do the hard work of building relationships. We want to hurry up and get to revival. We want to hurry up and plan the next cool event or whatever. And I would say, whatever setting that you're in, make building relationship priority. Start there and give yourself, I don't want to say a year or whatever, but let that be it, and then build that foundation organically. And then I think God will start to open doors for other things to take place.
Well, thank you for watching another episode of the Jude 3 Project podcast. As always, I'm your host, Lisa Fields, the founder of the Jude 3 Project. And I'm so excited to bring you another special guest, Miss Khristi Adams. Welcome, Khristi.
Thank you. I'm glad to hang out with you for a little bit.
Thank you for being a guest on the podcast. Tell our audience just a little bit about who you are.
Right now I'm working as a chaplain. The official title is Firestone Endowment Chaplain at a boarding school in Pennsylvania. But I'm also a religious studies teacher, so I teach a few classes here. And I work as a co-director of diversity and inclusion. So that's sort of like not my career, but more my job. But I'm also an author. Which takes a lot for me to sort of finally say out loud. And then also an ordained pastor at my church. Actually, I'm not a senior pastor, but an associate pastor at my church in Somerset, New Jersey. And so I also sort of consider myself a minister and a youth advocate. And I like to go around and speak when I get the opportunity.
That's awesome. I was just in New Jersey in Princeton. How far are you from there?
So right now I'm in Pennsylvania, my family's in Jersey, and from Princeton, because I went to the seminary, from Princeton, and it's about, I don't know, maybe a half hour, 35 minutes. So it's right up Route 1. So it's a straight shot.
Cool. We're going to be talking about your new book, Parable of a Brown Girl, which I think is going to be so helpful to brown girls like us. Kind of tell us, what was the inspiration of your book?
I had met so many girls in the course of my career, and my career, my jobs have taken me in various environments. So whether that's church environments, whether that's pastoral care settings, more counseling settings. I've worked as a university chaplain in higher ed, and now I'm here at the boarding school. So just different settings, residential treatment facility I worked at right out of college. But in each of these settings, I have met Black girls specifically, whether it's been predominantly white settings or whatever it might be. I've met and been able to build relationships with these girls. And so they have been the inspiration, but the conversations and the relationships that have been built, I have often said, I wish other people could hear you. I wish other people could get a chance to meet you, to experience what it is that I'm experiencing just by knowing you. And so they have inspired me. I didn't know how. I had spent so much time thinking about, how do we find ways to center these girls? How do we find ways to not just create safe spaces for them, but also to allow other people to get the opportunity to glean from their wisdom. And I didn't know it was going to come in the form of a book. I've asked that question. That's been sort of like the thesis question for me for the past few years. But when I was approached about writing a book, one of the first things I thought when I was brainstorming was, here's a prime opportunity to get to sort of share these girls' stories and find ways to expose other people to them.
That's extremely, extremely important. When you were thinking about the stories you were going to select, kind of how did you pick? Because I'm sure you've heard more stories than you could include in the book. How did you select the stories?
That was really hard, but easy at the same time. The ones that stuck with me, the ones that I, maybe the girls that I have met, or one particular girl, let's say, that I had met maybe 5 years ago that I hadn't talked to maybe since then, but for some reason her story sticks out to me, and had done something inside of me. That is that was pretty easy. The ones that just sort of never left me, those are the ones that I tried to highlight. And then, the other ones were just me having more conversations. When people asked me how I did research for the book, it was like just having conversations with Black girls, And so it was half the stories that had stuck with me, and then the other half were stories that sort of came about organically as a result of conversations. I do wish I could have done more, but obviously, you can only put so much in. So I had to be okay with knowing that this was like, this book would be more of a catalyst to open up other discussions and opportunities to share other stories. So that was sort of how I found the way to reconcile it.
I love that. One of the things that I like that you mentioned was having conversations with young girls, because I think we live in a day where we feel like we need to talk to especially young people, and not have dialogue. It's kind of like I'm telling you what to do. So
Right.
it's kind of like a humanity to them. I think that bring conversation. Do you see that when you approach them, like, I want to talk to you, I just don't want to tell you what to do?
Yeah. Once and really it started, even though I had been working with them for years. A few years ago, I was working in a counseling center as sort of like a pastoral counselor. And so it was my first time in that type of setting. I've been in settings where I'm in a church or university and they come to my office and we do sort of a counseling in between the workday. But when I worked at the counseling center, that is what they did. There were licensed counselors there, and that is what they did. And so sitting with the girls, it wasn't like, hey, let's have coffee, or let's just have this organic. These were scheduled out, parents or guardians or whatever, scheduling out, okay, 4 p.m., here's your time where you're going to meet with this girl. And so we were sitting and having the conversations. Originally, they were like I said, counseling sessions. But in the beginning, when I started working there, I was like, okay, how can I counsel? How can I give them advice? And then the more I sat with them, the more I was like, well, we're just working our way. We're just talking. We're just working our way. They need someone that would hear them out, that listened, that wasn't so quick to sort of give advice. And then the more that I would drive home after I left the counseling center, and I just remember one day just driving home feeling so full. Like, I just remember being like, wow, like, I just learned so much. Like, I got so much out of that conversation that I had with that girl. And being like, that changed, I think, my approach to, I've always, just wanted to build relationships and have conversation, but sitting in those counseling sessions and where it was officially supposed to be a setting where I'm giving advice, and then changing my whole approach, because I was like, well, I'm learning something too from being here. This is sort of a give and take relationship, because I'm getting out of it and they don't even realize that I'm getting out of it. So I had to approach these conversations like a teacher and a student. So I'm both teacher and student when I'm sitting with them, and I think that has helped me since then, even when I am in other settings with girls too.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful. I remember doing some mentorship at a particular school in Jacksonville,
Mm-hmm.
and going in like excited, like I'm going to share all this wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm listening to them tell me their stories, I'm just like quiet, because I'm like, I have like cookie cutter answers, but I don't really have answers to the stuff y'all dealing with, because y'all do some real stuff that I've never dealt with as an adult. So,
I've shared this a few other times. There's, in the first chapter of my book, it's about this 9-year-old girl that I've been, the beginning of the chapter, at least, is about this 9-year-old girl that I've been working with, going through some challenges or whatever. And she was just coloring, and then she just says to me, well, why did God make me a warrior when I'm really just weak, And I always like laugh at that, because that was a moment where I was like, I don't know. Like, just like you just said, like, I was like, number one, I didn't expect it to come out of her, because she's so young, and the way that she articulated it was a way that I hadn't been able to articulate my own, similar struggles. And she was going through stuff, and that is how she was working through it. And I just didn't, I mean, and I write in the book, I did not have an answer for her. Like, I was like, I don't know. I was like, we'll talk about this next week. And I talk about how I spent like the next week thinking about it and was like, oh, wow, like, number one, how do I respond to her? And then number two, I have the same question. You know what I mean? For myself. So it's really interesting being in those settings, and you're like, wow, you have to really humble yourself and sort of, that's what Jesus says, right? You have to become like a little child. That's literally what it means, when it comes to sort of dealing with these types of issues with these types of kids.
As you were writing the book, kind of what I know you broke it down into the chapters of the different kind of adjectives for the girl. How did you decide kind of which ones to use?
Yeah, so similar to what I was saying about deciding which girls to use. Some just were automatic. Angry Black woman, that is a stereotypical phrase that we sort of hear often. So I already knew for one of them it was going to be Parable of the Angry Brown Girl. The fast, I had heard the term fast growing up in our culture, and so fast was going to be one. There were some that were just sort of automatic, and then there were others that I had to think through a little bit more. And one of the things that my publisher wanted was for the chapter titles to be consistent. So such and such brown girl, such and such brown girl. So it had to sort of flow that way. And then we decided that based off of the stories, the chapter titles would reflect their struggle or their thing, whatever that thing is. So, the white acting brown girl, that was something that was sort of like not a no-brainer. It was a no-brainer what she was going through, but how to word it. I had to sit and think through, but it was easy because the stories were already written and I already knew what they were going through. I just had to find a way to highlight it so that the chapter would make sense to it.
As you were talking, I thought about how most Black women are hyper-sexualized. And so, thought of just off the bat as fast without knowing the story behind it and how culture has played into it. How kind of did you think through writing that particular chapter?
Yeah. I don't say it wasn't fun for me to write. I was about to say that was a fun one. I guess it was to an extent to dive into it. When I took in seminary, I took a feminist womanist class, and we would dive into a lot of these conversations, and that was actually when I first, I don't know if I learned about Sarah Bartman in college, but the whole Hottentot Venus, Sarah Bartman, we dove into it in seminary. We went back a lot into how these myths around Black women's sexuality began. It was fun for me to do that chapter because I had to go back to those days when I was studying those things and to see where it has come. And even though fast isn't necessarily a term I think this current generation hears a lot, because I did ask them, like, do you hear the term fast? They don't. They hear the sentiment behind it, but not necessarily the term like we did. But it was interesting for me to see how far back the myths around Black women's sexuality, how it began in slavery and Hottentot Venus, and sort of tracing it all the way to where we're at now with these girls and how Black girls are hypersexualized, how that sort of stuck with. And then using the girl's story that I wrote about specifically in the book that I had been working with. So every chapter is similar in the sense that I do like a tracing. I go back to like the historical a bit, I touch on it a bit, and then sort of bring it current. So I did that with the sexuality chapter, the fast chapter. I would talk about the Hottentot Venus, but I also went into talking about R. Kelly's surviving R. Kelly. I think that might have been the chapter that I did that. I definitely wove that in, weave that in somehow. But I I did a lot of going back and then tracing and then bringing us sort of to the present. But then the second part of the chapter is of each chapter always gives some sort of theological, spiritual perspective as well. And in that chapter, I'm pretty sure that was sort of going back to the why God created Black girls' bodies and created us, for goodness, and sort of how to um, sort of take back some of those things that have been said about who we are and how we use our bodies, and now reimagine it in how God sees us. So.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful. As you also were talking when you mentioned the white acting Black girl, I thought that was a very interesting title, especially because I do think I mean in my day, which I don't think is too dated, even though I feel like sometimes I'm getting old as a about to be 33-year-old. We used to call them Oreos in school. I don't know if y'all did that as well, but it was the Black on the outside, white on the inside. Why did you feel it important to talk about that, to address that?
You know what? I think that was one of those. There were certain ones that I said, okay, these are automatically going in. I think that story was one I had to not do a little bit more research. That came about in the middle of writing the book. I had heard we have these chapel talks at the Hill. We have chapel, and then we have a speaker, but we call them chapel talks. And the speaker is always a student of some sort, typically a faculty member sometimes, but a student. And there was one student who got up and spoke about that, the whole idea of being an Oreo and how she didn't fit into before she got to the school that I'm at now and her elementary, junior high schools or whatever, how she didn't fit in. They were mainly Black, but now how she is at this sort of school that's predominantly white, and how it had followed her. And I was like, that needs to be addressed. It wasn't that girl, but it was another girl that I had been working with that I knew that had been something that had followed her, and that she wrestled with a lot internally. And it was that way for me. So then, like, once I had my aha moment, then I was like, oh my gosh, this was another component of my childhood, and how I wrestled with in certain school settings. My church was Black. My friends at church were everything. I spent majority of my time at church, but then my school, before I got to high school at least, was white. So how did I wrestle with them? So the question became, how do girls nowadays in these environments, how do they feel? How do they deal with it? What healing spaces do they have in order to manage, their emotions in it? And they're struggling, So I felt like it was really important to put that in there for those girls and women like myself who have had those experiences.
Mm-hmm. One of the challenges I think the church is facing is how to connect with young people, especially young girls. How would you advise, from your work and through this book, that people have conversations? Because I think the basic gift of just having a conversation is hard for most people, for most adults, to have with children. How would you advise them, or what are some just helpful tips you would give?
When I started working, I worked in California for a while at Azusa Pacific University, and my boss at the time, he was very relational. Everything was relationship, and I wasn't necessarily like that in the beginning. And he would say to me, your first year, I just want you to build relationships. I just want you to take students to coffee. I want you to go ask the janitor, if they want to grab lunch. That's all he wanted me to do. I remember I was just so annoyed with that in the beginning, because I'm like, well, let's plan. We got services to plan and this cool event, and he was like, nope, you're just going to spend the first year building relationships, because his philosophy was that you set that foundation, then everything else is going to come easier for you. When you need something in the future, I couldn't conceptualize it, but eventually I got it. And I believe in that. I was a youth pastor before I got to APU, and I just, I think I did the best I could do with what limited, knowledge that I did have. But it really was when I got to APU that I was like, okay, relationships, that's what's central. And, he always just sort of encouraged me not to rush to like planning or doing or advising. And that has stuck with me. And it's advice that I give people who want to, how do I work with kids? We don't have the patience to do the hard work of building relationships. We want to hurry up and get to revival. We want to hurry up and plan the next cool event or whatever. And I would say, whatever setting that you're in, make building relationship priority. Start there and give yourself, I don't want to say a year or whatever, but let that be it, and then build that foundation organically. And then I think God will start to open doors for other things to take place. So many times with kids, we just want to jump to. We want to jump to advise. We want to tell them what they should be doing, how they should be thinking. I was working at when I was working I was a chaplain in residence at Georgetown University a few years ago, and at the time, a supervisor he had said to me. He was saying to the whole group of us in a meeting, you all need to be doing the planning. You're the experts. You need to be planning programs and events. You're the ones, and I rose my hand and we're saying to him, well, yeah, we're the experts to an extent. The kids are the experts over their own lives, right? The students are. So we need to be sitting with them and listening to them and hearing their needs and what they would like, they may not want a Bible study. You know what I mean? Like, that may not be something that sits well with them. It might have worked for you, but it doesn't work for them. And he was like, well, I disagree. And I'm like, well, I disagree, because what I have learned, is that we have to start looking at them as the teachers, as the experts, and not us as the high and mighty that are looking down on them. So that's 2. Build relationships, number 1. And then number 2, as you're building those relationships, you're listening keenly for the Spirit to speak, right? For God to sort of speak through them so you can hear, okay, this is what the need is. So whenever I go into a new environment, I started working here, the first year, every time I go into a new space, I don't start planning because I don't know the context. I don't know the kids, The first thing I do is, okay, I need to do the hard work of just sitting back and listening and asking them how they're doing and not having an agenda. So
that's extremely helpful. I was just talking to an apologist in Atlanta, and he had went into a detention center and he was like, I thought I was about to kill it. I had all the answers to the questions, and he was like, I got in there and I was like, oh snap, this is different than the university settings I've been in doing Q&A. The questions are totally different. And he was asking, because he went to, he wanted to speak at like the juvenile detention center to the boys and the girls, but they were like, we don't have a program for the guys. And he was like, well, why don't you have a program for the guys? He was like, because we haven't got enough men to be willing to stay. And it was the same point that you made about rushing to revival and not relationship. So he said the women were more patient to know that this is a process of I'm going to be coming back sometime. And then we're like, okay, if I didn't get them to move or change or make a decision in the first day, they weren't interested in coming back. And I think we ought to, like you said, struggle with the patience to sit with young people to know this is going to be a process of time. I could say something that I think will hit that work for me that won't necessarily work for them. And it's going to take 5 years till they get it. And we're not there for the process.
Right.
Because our culture wants microwaves.
Yeah. It could take a while. And that was why I didn't want to sit for, I'm like, a year? You want me to just hang out with people for a year? I'm not getting paid for that. I'm getting paid for results, And it's like, it's not how God works. That's not how God works. God is very patient with us, God doesn't rush us. We rush other people and we rush kids. It's not right.
Yeah, it gives that image of the incarnation and how long God waited even to just send his son to come. I'm thinking that like that's a long time and I struggle with patience. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that is a discipline I need to get better at. What other things that you want to highlight in the book that we haven't addressed already?
Um, you know, the biggest thing I took away is that Black girls now, it's intergenerational. It's an intergenerational struggle and wrestling. Even the good parts. There's so much overlap. Um, and that's one of the biggest things that I've learned. That the girls, they're not reading the books we're reading, or not necessarily exposed to the things that we were. Yet they're going through similar things. They're saying the same, very similar things. The hair struggles, the skin complexion, the weight. Black girls' bodies and how Black girls' bodies are shaped. The voice, having to sort of come to voice this idea. This one girl, was sharing with me how when she was assaulted, she went to tell a family member, and the family member was like, "You better not be lying." I mean, we have passed these things on to these girls. You know what I mean? Somehow they are inheriting some of the same things, not by any of like our fault per se. I think it's more just the nature of being a Black girl growing up in this world, and how culture views us, and those things are passed on. And it was also similar. Like each girl, I could pinpoint a similar thing that I had gone through. They have different stories and unique circumstances, things that I've never touched on in my own family or in my own personal life. But some of those, there were some of those sort of things that they may have pointed out, like being an angry Black woman, having an attitude, all of that stuff that is sort of put on to them. They're like 9, 10, 11 years old, and my thing is like, okay, if this is going to be inherited, how do we get it early? And I think our culture is doing a good job of getting it now. We have more representation out there, more Black girls rock, and celebration of Black womanhood and who we are. So those girls are being exposed to those things differently than I was when I was their age. But the question that I have from my own life and work really is, okay, how do I stop it? How do I get it right at 9 years old? How do I get it right? For me, it was like how with the girl that asked, why did God make me a warrior when I'm really just weak? And my response to her eventually was, warriors are weak. That God makes room for us in our weakness and our strength. While that may have been a lesson that I wound up getting later in life, my job was to see how I could share that with her and how she could internalize that earlier than I did. So what I want for the book, I always tell people, they're like, I'm going to get this book for my 12-year-old. Okay. Like it's not really written. It's not written for kids, to be honest. High school girls can read it. I even think junior high could probably read it. But it's not written for people to grab the book and say, I'm going to give this to my 12-year-old. It's for you to read it. It's for us to read it. And not just us as in Black people. I'm talking about adults, period, who are, mentors in relationship with, teach, pastor, whatever it is, they want to find ways of connecting and relating to Black girls and how they can sort of work with. Those are the people that I want the book to touch, and of course the Black girls, I want them to read it. But I don't want them to be the sole ones reading it because they're reading their own stories. They already know what they're going through. I try to articulate things differently so that they can have a different narrative for themselves. But I don't want them just reading and then, it goes away. No, it's for us. It's for adults.
I love that you say it's for adults because I think, a lot of times there are plenty of adults who can't even give voice to their struggles the ways in which younger people are more comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And sometimes hearing somebody younger tell their story may give them freedom to tell their story and also deal with their own traumas, because there are plenty of adult women walking around with trauma that they're scared to process, and sometimes hearing it from a younger person gives them the courage to do so.
Yeah. My mom, when she read the book, she was like, wow, those girl, I mean, these are the same things that I was going through and am going through. So I thought that was interesting when she read it, and that was her response, because that was what I felt when I'm, talking to them. So that's my hope, that that people will, if Black women particularly, read it and say, wow, they are sharing something with me about my own life and struggle, and helping me come to terms with X, Y, and Z of what I've been dealing with.
How can people get the book?
Yeah, so the book is on. The book comes out in 2 weeks. Is it 2 weeks exactly? Yeah, pretty much. So it comes out February 4th. You can pre-order the book on Amazon or Barnes and Noble right now. You can. It's published by Fortress Press, so you can also go on the Fortress Press website. Honestly, if you just Google "Parable of the Brown Girl," there'll be some options for you to be able to pre-order the book. Yeah, and that's it for getting it. Or you can get the book on the 4th and order it then. I think if you pre-order it, it should get there on the 4th, if I'm not mistaken.
How can people get a hold of you on social?
Yeah, so on Twitter, my name is at Khristi Lauren, my middle name, Khristi Lauren. So at Khristi Lauren, KHRISTI LAUREN. And on Instagram, it's at Khristi Adams. Again, another one of those, you can just Google Khristi Adams and it'll come up. Facebook, I'm not on Facebook. I'm sort of anti-Facebook, but I have a Facebook, Parable the Brown Girl has a Facebook page. And so I interact a lot up there. So you can just type in Parable of the Brown Girl in the search, and you'll be able to find it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Khristi. This has been a rich conversation. Remember, you can check out all the Jude 3 social medias at jude3project.org. It's right above me. And get our new curriculum through Eyes of Color, their merchandise, and our online course. Remember, here at the Jude 3 Project, we're helping you know what you believe and why you believe it.